We start again.
I have the pleasure to introduce you Mr. Paolo Saccomano, who is Vice President Supply Chain of Telecom Italia. That means the biggest telco operator in Italy, and until some years ago, the only telco operator in Italy. So, I think it is a very good contribution we get, because we are used to think about the supply chain as a transport chain with some warehousing activity, but we lack in many projects the point of view of the supply chain manager that has a different point of view of the supply chain. So that's a chain of goods, of stocks, of in the end money flowing through the chain, and this is, I think, something that we have to consider in our projects.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. I have to say, first of all, that I found the previous presentation very interesting and very inspiring, because there were many interesting concepts. There is only one thing that I didn't like very much, and it was the fact that among the benefits of the portal that Marcus was presenting, there was a reduction in phone costs by 80%. Which is not exactly what we are aiming for. So I hope that not everybody gets these same benefits, or at least that this is offset by more than proportional increase in data traffic. Okay. Having said that, I'm gonna talk about something a little bit different right now, because as a telecom carrier, you can understand we are a service company, and even if our turnover is 30 billion euros, which is not that far from Unilever figure, but our logistics spend, I'm sure, is much smaller, because in reality we sell services, and the material for us are only ancillary. So we have probably a quite large number of shipments, but of very small packages, essentially. So it's a very different business than what we have seen so far. This is a very schematic representation of our supply chain, which is a loop more than a chain in reality. First of all, we do not take care of the inbound transportation from our suppliers. So all the contract terms in our supply contracts are for delivery at our central warehouse. We have in Italy only one central warehouse. And so what our logistics challenge is basically a distribution challenge. We need to distribute the goods to a number of different chains, in reality, a number of different channels, if you like. And then we need to take back the material that come from the field in the reverse logistics part, because we have a substantial reverse logistic flow coming from the same channels. And we have to manage also the repair and refurbishment of some of these goods to re-inject them in the chain. So this is why it's also, it's not exactly chain, but it resembles more a loop than a chain. What are our main, just a brief description of the kind of products that we have to manage and where they typically go. We have basically 4 different areas. One is the typical retail distribution. We obviously ship products such as cell phones or modems, this kind of stuff, to a network of franchised shops. Very few owned shops in Italy, and then all the big retail chains. Okay, so this is pretty standard distribution logistic stuff. Then we have a very important part of our business and of our logistics spend that is tied up with the home deliveries. And when I talk home deliveries, I mean both to families, but also to small businesses. Because we have direct channels that for us are very important channels, primarily through call centers and also through the web. We sell a very important portion of our services. And when we sell products and services throughout these channels, we have to make deliveries at home, basically, or to the premises of our customers, if they are business customers. So this is a quite important part for us, particularly in terms of cost, because I'm sure if you are familiar with this kind of deliveries, these tend to be a very expensive part of the logistics budget. And then we have another word, which is the whole area of shipping materials, which have to be used by our technicians, which are on field, to do the delivery and installation of products that need to be configured at the client premises, or to do the assurance part. When something doesn't work, one of our technicians goes to the client premises and fixes something. And to do this, it needs some material, obviously. Now, this is a quite peculiar challenge to distribute these materials, because our technicians are spread out throughout all the countries, and we need to reach them in a very capillary way. So we have over 200 forward stock locations where these technicians go and pick up the materials they need. Why do we need this capillary network? Because the most important cost item in this chain is not the logistics cost, but is the productivity of our technicians. If they lose 50% of their working time to go around and look for materials, obviously we lose a lot of money in doing this kind of business. So we need to get the materials in those forward stock locations, and because we have very challenging SLAs with our customers, we also need to deploy stock in these locations. So these are not just shipping points, okay, or delivery points. These are places where we need to have a stock of at least for some of the products we have in our portfolio. And of course, we are talking not just about complete products, but also about spare parts. And when we talk about spare parts, one of the challenges, as I'm sure you know, is that the number of items that you end up managing scales up very quickly to tens of thousands of different SKUs. Finally, the fourth chunk of our supply chain is a supply chain of network construction, essentially. So for this, we use very often installation companies that are our partners, and we have to make sure that they have all the materials they need to build the telecom network infrastructure. We are talking primarily about passive telecom network materials such as cables, poles, and this kind of stuff. And again, this is another peculiar supply chain, because those installation companies operate in the field. They have also their own technicians, and you have to ship those materials in about 130 different locations, which are the deposits of these installation companies, again spread out across all the country. And this is the distribution part. As I said at the beginning, we also have the reverse flow. So from all of these channels, we receive some materials back for different reasons. For example, because they are the failed parts that get broken for some reason, or because the clients have, as you know, the right to change their mind when they buy something, and within 8 or 10 days they can return the product. Okay? So there are different reasons why we get products back from the field, or materials back from the field. And some of them we need to repair or refurbish. Some other are no longer needed, and we just unfortunately need to get rid of them in our warehouse. So this is just to give you a flavor of how the supply chain looks like at Telecom Italia. And as you can see, it is in a sense a very simple chain, because we are only dealing with one country, and it's mainly a final distribution chain. we don't have all the complexities of managing the inbound flows. On the other hand, it has the peculiarity of having to do with a lot of different stock locations and an incredible number of different final addresses that we need to reach. Because we need to reach every year about 1 million different addresses because of this B2C business that we have. And so these are the complexities that we need to manage. I would like to address the issues of the logistics infrastructure from a perspective that is based on our recent experience and on the projects that we are currently focusing on at Telecom Italia. And there are three specific areas that I would like to share with you. One is the theme of stock planning and deployment. The second point is supply chain collaboration, which is something we have already heard about a lot today, but we talk here about a slightly different kind of supply chain collaboration. And the third area is the use of digital documents. Okay? Why are we focusing on these areas? Essentially because they have become very important for managing our service to the customers and our logistics costs. And when I say cost, I mean total cost, so not just the pure cost of shipping the goods, but more importantly for Telecom Italia, the amount of inventory that is tied up in the supply chain. As we ship products that are pretty valuable, think about cell phones or tablets, etc., it's very easy, even with numbers that are not huge, to come up with very important numbers in terms of capital tied up in the supply chain. So it's very important for us to minimize the total cost also from this perspective. And these areas that we are focusing on are therefore areas that are particularly crucial for our business for different reasons. In stock planning and deployment, we have basically the issue of minimizing the inventory and also of optimizing the way in which we balance the inventory that we have to deploy on the field. As I said, while the retail channel is basically served through a centralized inventory, and all our commercial products only sit in one warehouse in Italy, the materials that are used by our technicians, our on-field technicians, must be deployed in 100 or 200 different places. So also the balancing of the inventory in these 200 different places can become an important cost, both in terms of inventory and shipping cost for transferring inventory from one place to the other. Obviously, planning accurately these different supply chains means essentially reducing the stock levels and also reduce the stock balancing cost. The second area that is important is supply chain collaboration, and what we mean here is not what has been explained before in terms of horizontal collaboration. What we mean here by supply chain collaboration is, in a more classical sense, a vertical collaboration between our suppliers, ourselves, and our retail channels. Okay? And this is especially important in the business of cell phones, tablets, etc., because that's where it is important to collaborate with the big vendors like the Apples, Samsung, etc. of this world, and our retail channels in order to optimize the whole supply chain. Again, why is this important? Because in this way we can minimize the stock levels, and more importantly, given the nature of our products, which have a very short product life cycle, as you know, I mean, any given model of a cell phone or a tablet probably stays in the marketplace for 6 to 12 months and then it's obsolete. We need to manage very accurately the stock obsolescence cost, because the stock can become obsolete and then there are huge costs that are shared between our suppliers, i.e. the various OEMs, and Telecom Italia as a carrier, in terms of devaluation of this stock, which means we have to sell the product at a lower price. Okay? So it's important to manage very well the stock levels, because if you end up with a huge stock of old products and then a new product comes in, basically you have to sell the old products at half the original price. So the supply chain collaboration among all the actors of the supply chain is very important to achieve this goal. And the third area is important because we need, particularly in the B2C channel, we have to manage a lot of document flow together with transport. Okay? We are talking about B2C, so we are talking about individual shipments, one item per each shipment, delivered to the home of the customer. And typically, this goes with a lot of documentation. For example, the contract to be signed by the customer. Or for certain services, like the mobile services, we need also to get a copy of the ID document of the customer, because there is a law in Italy that makes it mandatory for following the anti-terrorism laws after 9/11 of 2001. So there are a number of document flows that have to go together with the product, and focusing on managing accurately this document flow can have a big impact on two aspects of our performance. One is revenue acceleration, and the second is the carbon footprint. Why revenue acceleration? Because in many occasions, the only way to start invoicing the customer for the services, we can only do it when we receive back this documentation, the signed contract, the IT document of the customer, etc. We cannot start invoicing the service before we actually have these documents. We cannot activate the services. So if we get the documents back very quickly, it means we can start invoicing sooner rather than later. So this is really additional revenues for the company, or at least earlier revenues. Okay? And CO2 impact, because obviously printing all those documents and making all those documents traveling around Italy can have a big impact in terms of CO2. And the whole issue here is about making all of this digital. So we transfer digital documents instead of transferring paper. Okay? Which is not, I think, something revolutionary, but it's quite difficult to make it happen. Okay, let's focus a little bit on these examples and what we are doing exactly in these three areas. The first area is stock planning and deployment. What we have done here, we started from one of these four chains that I showed you, the one for on-field technicians. So we started in that area. And for those materials, we decided to introduce some advanced forecasting and stock planning methodologies using a specific product which is the SO99 Plus suite by Truls Group, to do the following things. First of all, to replenish the central stock. So to decide what we have to purchase from suppliers, in which quantities, in which dates. And if you like, the peculiarity here is that in placing the orders, we need to decide at the same time when do we need to buy new products and when instead we can purchase repaired products. Basically, we can order the refurbishment of the product we have received back from the field. So we also have to optimize this trade-off between new parts and refurbished parts. And so this is what we do in terms of replenishment of central stock. Then we use this same methodology and product to decide how much stock we need to deploy in the forward stock locations, in the 200 places where our technicians go and pick up the material. And finally, we need to use this methodology to balance the stock levels according to the actual consumption of these materials. Why did we decide to follow this route? Because particularly for the assurance part of our business, it is very difficult to size accurately the stock, because we are talking about tens of thousands of different part numbers, which are characterized by a very infrequent usage. So it can happen that I use one spare part in a specific forward store location once a year, but I needed to have it there, because if I don't have it there, when it gets broken, I'm not able to meet the SLA requirements of my clients. So, having to do with this kind of complexity, it was important to have a kind of intelligent methodology of managing huge amount of data about historical consumption in order to forecast future demand. One obvious objection to this is that you don't need necessarily to look at the past to forecast demand. You could base your stock deployment decisions on the knowledge of your installed base. And that's the difficult part, because in reality it is very difficult to know what exactly is the installed base. Particularly if you talk about a generation of products that have been in our sales portfolio for many years, and therefore you have, for example, when you think voice switchboards, there have been several generations of voice switchboards that have been sold through the last 20 years. They are all on the field, and each one of them can get broken, and you need a different spare part to repair it. So because of that, it is basically impossible to know exactly what the installed base is. And the only way to approach as close as possible what your future demand will be is to look at the historical consumption of this spare part. So we use this software to optimize these decisions. And at the end, what we are getting in terms of benefits are what you can see on these slides. First of all, the first benefit that we could witness was an improvement in the service level we are giving to our customers, because we were able to meet the SLAs that we had agreed with our customer in a far greater percentage than we were before. So, customer service was the first impact. After that, we started to see some improvement in the inventory levels. The avoidance of unnecessary transport to balance the stock between different forward stock locations. And in the end, even if this was not the main reason for undertaking the project, we also witnessed a very important side effect, which is a very sharp improvement in the labor productivity of our planners. Because with this kind of tool, they can, and with this kind of methodology, they can focus on the exceptions, really, which is what you need to do when you need to manage these big numbers of different SKUs. So this is stock planning and deployment. Definitely for us is a major item that we need to address. The second area that we are addressing is supply chain collaboration. And as I said, we are talking about collaboration between ourselves. We are in the middle. We are a kind of distributor. We are in the middle between the vendors, the OEMs of cell phones, etc., and the retail chains, okay, or our stores. So, what is the critical information to be shared here? The critical information to be shared in this case is information about the actual sales level of each individual SKU. This is not obvious. All of you who have to do with the relationship between a company that is producing goods and the retailer know that the collaboration between these two entities is not always easy. And it is very difficult to share intimately this kind of data about the sellout. But even the sell-in is not known to our vendors, for example. So we started by sharing the sell-in information, i.e. what we ship to our shops. By sharing this information with our suppliers. We started to share inventory data with our suppliers in a reciprocal way, and we started to share data about inbound supply status. This was the first step. And it was already important because it gave our suppliers some visibility they didn't have before. The second step, which is even more interesting, and is what we are undertaking right now, is to start gathering and sharing data about the actual sellout from our retail channels. And due to the peculiarity of our business, this is not done by asking our retail channels to declare what the sellout is, which is something that really works very seldom. But this information is being gathered at the time of the activation of the SIM card on the network of the telephone carrier. Obviously, the complexity of gathering the information in this way is that we can only see the information of those customers that activate their SIM card on our network. Since there are also competitors' network, the difficulty is sharing the information, and this becomes horizontal collaboration, also with other carriers, in order to know what exactly has been activated in which network. This is still at the beginning, this project, but we are hoping to get important benefits because the supply chain will become then really transparent to all the actors of the chain. The third area that we are focusing on is that making all the documentation that goes with the transportation fully digital without having to ship around all these pieces of paper, particularly on the reverse flow, which is the most difficult flow. So the issue is not so much to avoid printing the contract because in this way, because in some way the customer has to sign it. Okay? But the problem is how quickly we can get these documents back from the field in order to start invoicing the customers. And obviously the obvious point here is that we need to make all of this digital. And we have done a first step with our logistics providers, which is to start digitalizing the document at the hub of the courier. But what we are piloting right now is the digital acquisition of the document at the source, which means that all the truck drivers are equipped with handheld devices that can take pictures of the documents, and in fact they send the picture of the document instead of sending the paper copy of the document to the hub. And this should reduce very sharply the time it takes to get those documents back. Obviously there will also be a benefit in terms of elimination of paper flows and therefore CO2 impact. In our, and here I come back to the link with the iCargo initiatives. So why are we talking about these topics in a context in which we seem to focus on transportation optimization? Because in reality, this is an important message also for the European institutions, I believe. The key success factors for us to make our supply chain work is not only the physical logistics infrastructure that is put in place. Obviously, you need a physical logistic infrastructure that is efficient, but that I consider it almost as a given. But what we have learned through these projects is that the bottleneck becomes the ICT infrastructure. The ICT infrastructure becomes a bottleneck for different reasons. First, for example, in the case of stock planning, one of the key problems that we had to face was the huge amount of data that we had to process in order to be able to develop those forecasts and to place the orders to our suppliers and to do all this optimization I talked to you about. Huge amount of data because we have to go back 4 years in history in order to have an accurate forecast, and we need to take all the individual warehouse movements of the last 4 years for these items that we manage in this way. So there is a huge amount of data that need to be managed in a quick way. On the collaboration part, the ICT infrastructure is critical because you need a seamless and secure way of sharing the information through all the actors of the supply chain, who can obviously have different vested interests, or not even a vested, different explicit interest, I would say. Okay? So the security of data that you need to share is obviously key. And in the third area, the area of digital documents, here the issue is slightly different. You need suddenly to manage a different kind of data, because you need to manage data files like pictures, etc., which are much heavier in terms of ICT requirements. You are not transferring a record, you are transferring a picture, okay? So, so you need obviously a different ICT infrastructure to do this. So the high performance in ICT infrastructure, at the end of the day, is what really matters to make this logistics flow work in the most efficient way, even more important than the physical infrastructure. And obviously on top of that, you need two other items which are not strictly related to the topic we are discussing here today: the availability of software solutions that help you do these things in an intelligent way, and possibly with solutions that are already packaged and that you don't need to develop yourself, and that are fully integrated with ERP systems like SAP. And finally, obviously, the people, the skill of your people. And I'm saying something completely obvious, but it's very clear that particularly in the stock planning area, when you start using these kind of methodologies, the skills of your planners must change completely. So I want to leave you with this thought that at the end of the day, when we talk about infrastructure, we hear a lot of discussions, particularly in the discussions that happen at the government level or at the European institution level, about corridors, about basic trunk line infrastructure, the ports, all this kind of stuff. All of this is very important, but at the end of the day, as far as Telecom Italia experience is concerned, the ICT infrastructure is the real enabler of making big process changes and big savings and big CO2 improvements. And that's it. I don't know if you have any questions.
I have one, but I've been the first one to ask questions so far, so maybe somebody else. No? Just one big question in my mind was, you mentioned that your field service engineers, let's say, productivity levels were like very important to you, but when you listed the benefits, you mentioned that the labor productivity for your planners had increased as a result of all of this. No impact on your field service engineer?
Not much, and not easy to measure, because we were already distributing the products in the same places. So we didn't change the network design. Okay? The design of the network is the same, but this is another area, obviously. I think the question is very correct, because one obvious next step is to start thinking at using these methodologies not only to optimize the inventory, but also to optimize the network design. So one can start asking, you can start asking yourself, is 200 the right number of forward store locations you need to have? Can I maybe further improve the service level and further improve the productivity of my technicians by deploying the stock in 400 locations? Obviously, yes. but you have to see how much the stock goes up. Okay?
Comes at a cost.
It comes at a cost.
Anybody else?
Thanks again,
Good.
Paolo.
Thanks.